Yasiel Puig was found guilty. He was charged after a 2022 interview with the FBI, denying he placed bets with an organized gambling operation run by Wayne Nix. Yasiel is charged with one count of making false statements and one count of obstructing justice. Puig previously agreed to a plea deal in 2022, but backed out of it to fight the charges. Prosecutors also presented evidence that he placed hundreds of bets on football, basketball, and tennis. Puig is facing up to 20 years in prison. He will be sentenced on May 26, 2026. Make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe.
Jurors agreed with prosecutors that Puig lied to investigators during a 2022 interview about his involvement in an illegal sports betting operation that was tied to a broader federal gambling investigation. Prosecutors argued that Puig actually placed hundreds of bets through an unlicensed bookmaker while playing professional baseball, then downplayed or denied that activity when federal agents questioned him years later. Puig's defense had argued that Puig never intended to lie. He told jurors that he was confused during those interviews and struggled to remember the details. That was arguments obviously the jury did not buy.
Now here, it's about to get interesting. Pay attention.
The accounts of Puig's defection are all alleged because he himself has not publicly spoken about it. They come from articles written by ESPN and LA Magazine and are based on a first-hand account of the defection that were made public through a lawsuit that sued Puig for $12 million based on actions he made while trying to defect from Cuba. Nobody really knows how many times Yasiel Puig attempted to escape Cuba, but there were at least 4 documented failed attempts. The first one was in 2009. Puig was 19 years old and already at the highest level of Cuban baseball. He was selected to the Cuban national team and was playing in the Cuban National Series, essentially Cuba's version of MLB. His baseball talent made him worth tens of millions of dollars in America, but in Cuba, he was getting paid $17 a month. But in 2009, Yasiel Puig was suspended from playing baseball in Cuba. Some claim it was due to his lack of discipline, missing practice, showing up late, or according to his childhood friend, he was quote-unquote just a little crazy, but in a good way. Beer and girls, always a party. According to other people in Cuba, and what is more likely is that this suspension was due to his first defection attempt, which ended when he and 2 others were discovered by Cuban police. Puig was immediately placed in an extremely difficult situation. In order to be allowed to play baseball again, it is likely that the Cuban government offered Puig the ability to become a government informant, which according to a former Cuban intelligence agent is a deal that most members of the Cuban national baseball team have already agreed to. Turning people into the government can serve as a great way for athletes to get back in favor with the government after being suspended for trying to defect themselves, and according to an account given in a court affidavit, this is what Puig began to do, first by accusing 2 people he originally tried to escape with of human trafficking, causing both of them to receive 6-year prison sentences. Another man claims he was arrested by Cuban officials soon after having a short conversation with Puig. He says he had no plan of helping Puig escape, but was sentenced to 7 years in prison after Puig told Cuban officials the man offered him a plan to leave the island. In prison, this man says he was tortured and starved and eventually sued Puig in American court for $12 million for actively working with the Cuban government to torture an innocent man. And soon after, Puig was reinstated and invited to join the national team in a tournament in the Netherlands, where Puig was once again suspended. According to some, this was due to him trying to steal a pair of shoes from a Dutch mall, but according to most, and what is more likely, is that Puig was caught trying to defect again while at the tournament. Puig's second suspension basically gave him 2 options: never play baseball again or escape the island for good. Soon after, Puig was approached by an old friend, Junior de España, a Cuban boxer who had been kicked from the national team for being a flight risk. At the time, the 2 were really good friends and were about to go on a journey that would free them from Cuba forever. However, several incidents that occurred during and soon after this journey would tear the 2 apart, cause serious legal accusations between them, and put both of their lives in danger for years to come. According to de España, he became friends with a man in Miami who knew of Puig's baseball ability and knew smuggling out of Cuba would make him a ton of money. This man in Miami was not an experienced smuggler whatsoever. He was an air conditioning repairman who was on probation for trying to steal an air conditioning unit, using a fake credit card to buy $150,000 worth of beer, and having a fake ID. Using de España as a middleman, he offered to organize a group of smugglers to take Puig out of Cuba if Puig agreed to pay back all all the costs of the operation and give him 20% of all future contracts he signed. He promised Espana over $100,000 if he could convince Puig of taking the journey. Puig agreed to the deal, and the man in Miami hired a smuggling ring in Mexico to operate the defection. One of these smugglers was on the run and was on Florida's most wanted list for charges of grand larceny as well as aggravated assault of a police officer with a deadly weapon. Another was on the run for extorting a migrant family and was called one of the most important capos in the Cuban-American mob. Another one was missing a finger after being kidnapped in Mexico. Basically, these are people you don't want to mess with. The man in Miami promised to pay the group of smugglers $250,000 once they were able to get Puig to Mexico. During their first attempt, Puig and Espana were stopped when police pulled them over. On their second attempt, the boat never showed up. On their third attempt, police raided their safe house and detained them for 6 days. On their fourth attempt, they made it to sea, where they were intercepted by the Coast Guard in between Cuba and Haiti, where the group spent 6 days on a ship deck underneath a tarp with barely any food or water. Puig begged them to drop the group off anywhere but Cuba, but after 6 days, they were returned home. Soon after, Puig, Espana, and Puig's girlfriend set out for their fifth attempt. Knowing that being caught again could result in serious jail time, they decided to take a longer, more dangerous route that was less guarded. They even brought a priest from the Afro-Catholic religion of Santeria along for good luck. The priest recited prayers and sacrificed a chicken to bless the journey. All four got into a car, drove 3 hours, left the car, hiked for 30 hours without sleeping while hiding during the day to arrive at a pickup point that can only be reached by foot. The group was picked up by the smugglers in a cigarette boat and headed towards Mexico, but halfway through the trip, the boat ran out of gas, so for an entire night, the boat drifted at sea and was forced to paddle out of the way of a container ship that nearly crushed them. The smugglers contacted a colleague who came to refill the boat with a 50-foot yacht. And after 36 hours at sea, the group arrived in Mexico. There, the four shared a room in a rundown hotel owned by the smugglers to store migrants while they awaited payment. They had gotten through the most dangerous part of the journey and seemed to be home free, but quickly found out that the man in Miami who promised to pay the smugglers didn't even have the money to do so. So for the next 3 weeks, Yasiel Puig anxiously waited for the two parties to work out a deal. Every day the bill wasn't paid, the smugglers added a tax, which eventually raised the price to around $400,000. Becoming impatient, the smugglers started making threats, saying that they would cut Puig's fingers or arms off if the bill was not paid. But instead, they came up with a better plan. The smugglers began making calls and letting people know that they had Yasiel Puig ready to be brought to America, and that anyone willing to step in and pay the price would be entitled to 20% of his future earnings, which Puig originally agreed to pay the man in Miami. Puig had quickly gone from being a highly prized defector into a prisoner, literally being auctioned off to the highest bidder. The smugglers eventually found a guy who was willing to pay the $250,000. ESPN referred to this man as El Rubio, and he was the head of a smuggling ring himself. But when he agreed to this deal, he never actually intended on paying the price. Instead, he colluded with the man in Miami and told him to tell the smugglers that he would have the money ready shortly in order to buy more time. Then he told the man in Miami to call Puig and let him and the others know that they would hear a knock on the door at 1 a.m. The people knocking on the door would take him and the group out of the hotel, and unless they wanted to die at the hands of the smugglers, who were going to be extremely upset that they were getting ripped off, to leave with the man. El Rubio hired a man who had connections to the Mexican police to basically go into the hotel and forcefully remove Puig and the others from the smugglers to avoid having to pay the $250,000. That night, 2 men dressed in black entered the hotel. According to Espana, because of a random stroke of luck, the smugglers didn't even have anyone guarding the room like they usually did. That night, they secretly left the hotel without conflict. They were immediately taken on a plane and flew to Mexico City, all while being guarded by at least 3 armed men at all times to protect them from the smuggling ring that they had just ripped off. Through a series of bribes, the ringleader was able to get the group on flights without an ID and Mexican residence, and within days of the escape, Puig was already doing workouts for major league teams, and on June 28th, 2 months after leaving Cuba and before he was even able to open a US bank account, Yasiel Puig signed a 7-year, $42 million contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers. $8.4 million of this contract was to be taken out and divided up between the group of people who had just helped them escape. Yasiel Puig was free and extremely rich, but he just ripped off a group of extremely dangerous criminals who just illegally transported him across the Gulf of Mexico for free. A group of people who wanted money and revenge and would seek it for years to come, causing several incidents that put Yasiel Puig's life in serious danger throughout his major league career.